A little girl was secretly taking food from a store until one day she was caught by the owner. Determined to learn the truth, the owner decided to follow the child. What she discovered changed her outlook on life completely. Subscribe to the channel and comment what you would do if you were the seller. The bell above the door chimed as another customer entered the small grocery store. Megan Parker barely glanced up from the register while counting the bills from her morning sales. It was a slow afternoon, the kind she had grown accustomed to over the years. The neighborhood had changed significantly since she first opened her store 15 years ago. The people were now more hurried and desperate, and the rising crime rate meant that petty theft was a daily occurrence. With a resigned sigh, she closed the register and adjusted her apron, fully aware that running a store in this part of town meant keeping a constant watch on the shelves, especially near the front where the expensive items were kept. Over the years, she had seen all sorts of people come through, some honest, some not. Lately, however, Megan had been noticing a small, thin figure lingering outside near the dumpsters behind her store. At first, she barely paid attention because the sight of homeless people or those struggling to get by had become a sad but common reality. Yet this one figure was different. The child was simply too small. Every evening, just before closing, she would catch the child creeping toward the back alley and rummaging through the discarded produce and expired bread Megan tossed out. She couldn't understand why it bothered her so much, perhaps because the child was alone, or maybe because Megan faintly remembered what it was like to go to bed hungry. Still, hunger alone did not justify stealing, and she wasn't running a charity. If she began giving away food to every needy passerby, her business would soon collapse. One evening, while restocking the shelves, Megan saw a small shadow slip through the door. Realizing it was a girl, no older than 7 or 8, with short, uneven hair cut in haste, dressed in an oversized, faded jacket with shoes that were barely holding together, Megan's heart tightened. She pretended not to watch as the child moved swiftly down the aisles, stealing glances at the counter to ensure she wasn't being observed. In one fluid motion, the girl reached out, grabbed a loaf of bread from the lower shelf, and tucked it into her jacket. Megan stepped forward, her tone firm as she called, "Hey." The girl froze. Megan approached her, her hands resting on her hips. The child, with empty pockets and trembling thin fingers clutching the edge of her jacket, looked around as if searching for a way to escape. Without uttering a word, her wide, dark eyes conveyed a mix of fear and defiance. "Come on," Megan said. "I saw you take it for a moment." Slowly, the girl pulled the loaf from her jacket and held it out, her fingers shaking. Megan took the bread and sighed deeply. "You can't just walk in here and steal, kid. Are you hungry?" The girl remained silent, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Do you have parents?" Megan asked softly, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. The girl hesitated, then turned on her heel and ran out the door. Megan watched her disappear down the street, exhaling slowly as she pressed the loaf of bread against her hip. She wasn't sure whether she had expected gratitude, an apology, or simply an explanation for why a child was forced to steal food instead of being safe at home. But life, as Megan had learned long ago, rarely offered neat resolutions. That very night, as Megan returned to restocking the shelves, the image of the frightened girl's eyes stayed with her. The next evening, she kept her vigil, and the girl appeared once more. But this time, she did not enter the store. Instead, she went straight to the back alley, waiting for a moment when no one was watching before slipping toward the dumpsters. Quietly, Megan moved to the back door and cracked it open just enough to catch sight of the girl's small hands digging through the discarded food and pulling out an old bag of stale rolls. After tucking them into her jacket, the girl paused to look around cautiously, then darted away into the night. Megan's grip tightened on the doorknob as memories of past thefts, teenagers stealing beer, grown men hiding candy bars in their coats, flashed in her mind. But this was different. A child shouldn't have to dig through garbage for food, and the thought unsettled her more deeply than she cared to admit. The following day, Megan found herself once again watching the front door, wondering why the child didn't return. Perhaps part of her expected the girl to come back inside to steal again, Or maybe she hoped to confront her properly this time and ask what was really happening. Instead, the child never entered the store, always heading straight to the dumpsters and taking what she needed before disappearing. Megan exhaled and rubbed her face in frustration. This situation was getting under her skin. She wasn't a social worker, nor did she feel responsible for other people's problems, yet something about that little girl would not let her go. By the third night, Megan made up her mind. If the child wouldn't speak, then Megan would follow her to uncover the truth herself. Megan Parker had never been a particularly inquisitive person. She had lived in the same neighborhood for years, running the same small grocery store day in and day out, never venturing beyond her routine. But for the third consecutive evening, she found herself standing behind the store's back door, watching as the little girl disappeared down the alley, clutching a stale loaf of bread tightly to her chest. Something inside Megan hardened as she stepped back into the store to lock up for the night. The girl was too small, too thin, and moved with a quick, cautious grace, like a stray animal always bracing for a sudden kick, that made Megan feel profoundly uneasy. She remembered that same look from her own childhood reflections. That night, Megan lay awake in bed far longer than usual. Sleep eluded her as she repeatedly told herself that it wasn't her problem, that she wasn't a savior, and that she wasn't about to assume the responsibility for someone else's child. Yet the image of those tiny hands sifting through garbage, the way the girl clutched the loaf of bread as if it were a treasure, refused to leave her mind. By morning, Megan had resolved that if the child wouldn't speak, she would follow her to see where she went, to find out if she had a home, and whether someone was taking care of her. The evening arrived slowly as Megan worked through the day in a fog, barely registering the chatter of her regular customers. When she finally closed the store, a strange sense of anticipation curled in her stomach. She didn't have to wait long. Just as the street lights flickered on, the girl appeared at the far end of the alley. Moving cautiously, her small form was barely visible in the dim glow of the overhead bulbs. Megan stayed behind the door, watching as the girl approached a dumpster in search of anything remotely edible. Once the girl turned to leave, Megan slipped out of the store, careful to stay hidden. The child walked quickly, wrapping her arms around the gathered food and keeping her head low, as though afraid of being seen. They weaved through streets past shuttered storefronts and dim apartment buildings until, after several blocks, the girl turned sharply into a narrow alley. Megan hesitated for a moment before following. The buildings here were older, some with boarded-up windows covered in graffiti, and the alley led to a small, abandoned house with peeling paint and a front door barely clinging to its hinges. Megan paused, watching as the girl slipped inside without a knock. It was clear that this wasn't merely a stop along the way. It was home, at least for that moment. Megan considered turning around and leaving. She had followed the child and gotten her answer. The girl had somewhere to go, and she wasn't completely alone. Perhaps that was enough. But then, amid the silence, Megan heard a small, muffled voice, a child's voice. Intrigued and concerned, Megan moved closer, peering through a broken window. Inside, the girl knelt on the floor beside a thin, frail-looking boy who could hardly have been more than 4 years old. He sat on a pile of blankets, shivering slightly, as the girl pulled the bread from her jacket and handed it to him. His small, weak hands accepted the bread with a grateful expression, and he bit into it hungrily. Megan's heart clenched as she realized that the girl had a brother. She watched as the child gently stroked his brother's hair while they ate, with no sign of a mother or father, just the two of them alone in a house that looked as if it might collapse at any moment. In the corner, half hidden under a blanket, lay a small, motionless figure. At first, Megan thought it might be another child, but then she saw the thin ribs rising and falling with each breath. It was a dog, little more than skin and bones, with patchy, dull fur. The girl reached over, breaking off a small piece of bread to offer to the animal with gentle care. Megan felt something inside her break. For days she had assumed the worst about this child, convinced that she was merely another street kid with sticky fingers. Instead, this was a child fighting desperately to keep her little brother alive, even taking in a stray animal because despite her own desperation, she still found room for kindness. Trembling, Megan stepped back from the window. She knew she should leave, should pretend she had never witnessed any of this, but she couldn't. For the first time in years, something inside her urged her to stay and help. Later that morning, Megan sat at her kitchen table with a cold cup of tea, the events of the previous night replaying relentlessly in her mind. She had followed a little girl expecting to confirm her suspicions of petty theft, only to find a desperate child protecting her brother in a world that offered little kindness. The images of little Samantha sharing stolen bread with her brother Liam, comforting him with a tenderness no child should have to muster, and the sight of the frail dog curled up beside them, left Megan determined. Though the world was full of suffering and the task of fixing everything seemed impossible, she could not stop thinking about the way Samantha held Liam close and selflessly shared what little they had. As the sun rose, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, the city began to stir, yet Megan felt paralyzed by the weight of what she had seen. She recalled the many times she had judged others for stealing without pausing to consider their circumstances. Pushing aside her cold, now-forgotten tea, she resolved that mere food donations wouldn't suffice. These children needed stability, safety, and someone willing to fight for them. But Megan also feared that she might not be strong enough to be that person. When she reopened the store later that morning, she felt disconnected from her routine as her mind drifted back to Samantha's fragile face and Liam's desperate grasp on a piece of bread. Then, unexpectedly, Megan encountered someone she truly did not want to see. Olivia Grant, a longtime neighbor with a reputation for judgment and bitterness. Olivia had been a fixture in the neighborhood for nearly as long as Megan, and she had established herself as the unofficial voice of discontent. With opinions laced in prejudice, Olivia judged anyone who didn't meet her high standards. Clad in a pastel cardigan and carrying an expensive handbag, Olivia entered the store with an air of superiority. Megan forced herself to remain neutral as she greeted her, but Olivia's eyes soon narrowed. "Megan," she said coolly, "I've noticed you spending a lot of time near that old house on Maple Street." Her voice, though casual, carried an unmistakable edge. Megan's stomach tightened, knowing all too well that Olivia prided herself on noticing every little detail in the neighborhood. "I don't know what you're talking about," Megan replied evenly. Olivia let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, please. I saw you lurking around there the other night. I know what you're doing." Leaning against the counter, Megan asked, "And what exactly do you think I'm doing?" Olivia pursed her lips and tilted her head with a disdainful sneer. "Those kids, they trouble. They cause problems." Megan responded gently. "They're just children." Olivia countered sharply. "They trouble, and they don't belong here. First, they steal food, then they break into houses, and next, they're running with gangs. It's always the same story." Anger welled up in Megan's chest. Just yesterday, she might have dismissed such views, but now, after witnessing Samantha's tender care for Liam, Megan could not stand by. "They're starving," she said firmly, "and a little girl is trying to keep her baby brother alive, while all you can think about is how inconvenient this is for you." Olivia scoffed, shaking her head. "You think giving them food will change anything? They'll just keep taking, never stop." Megan's hand clenched into a fist. "People like that," Olivia shrugged dismissively. Megan, her heart pounding, realized that although she had tolerated Olivia's harsh words for years, she could no longer remain silent. "This isn't your business," Megan said coldly. Olivia's eyes flashed with amusement. "Oh, but it is. I don't want those kids ruining our neighborhood. And if you keep helping them, you'll regret it." With that, Olivia turned on her heel and strode out, leaving Megan standing in stunned silence. Though Megan wished Olivia were bluffing, deep down she knew better. Olivia never made empty threats. Megan had spent her life trying to stay neutral, keeping to herself, and letting the world move on. But now, feeling the weight of Olivia's words, she realized she had already taken a side, and there was no turning back. Outside, the air grew thick with the promise of an approaching storm. Dark clouds swallowed the remaining light as the sun dipped below the horizon. Megan stood at the entrance of her store, keys clutched tightly in her hand, lost in thoughts of the confrontation. She had never liked Olivia, yet had never made enemies before. But now, having painted a target on her back by speaking out, Megan's resolve hardened. She locked the door and headed for her car, knowing that Samantha and Liam were still at the house on Maple Street, still vulnerable. Olivia was now aware of them, and Megan could not trust that she would simply let it go. With a racing heart, she climbed into her car. The decision had been made the moment she spoke out against Olivia. She had spent too long second-guessing herself, and now there was no time to waste. Driving through quiet streets, neon reflections flickered on wet pavement, making familiar roads feel strangely ominous, as if unseen shadows lurked, waiting. When Megan finally reached the alley near the abandoned house, she killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the silence. The darkened windows of the house hinted at life inside. With quiet determination, she stepped out, her footsteps light, and approached the door. She knocked softly once. When nothing happened, she tried again. After a long pause, shuffling sounds inside signaled that someone was there. The door creaked open just enough for a pair of wary eyes to appear. "Samantha," came the soft word. Megan recognized the exhaustion on the girl's face, the slumped shoulders as if bracing for bad news. "It's me," Megan said gently. "May I come in?" Samantha hesitated, then slowly opened the door wider. The inside was even colder than the night air. Though Megan had been here before, standing in the sparse, nearly empty room, a few old blankets in a corner, an empty can that once held soup, and Liam curled up against a dog with patchy fur, she now felt the full weight of the scene. Crouching beside Liam, Megan asked, "Is he okay?" Samantha nodded, though her expression remained unreadable. "He's just tired," she replied softly. Megan ran a hand through her hair. "Something happened today," she began. Samantha's eyes flickered with suspicion. "There's a woman in the neighborhood. Her name is Olivia. She knows about you and your brother. She's the kind of person who stirs up trouble." Samantha's grip tightened on the edge of her oversized jacket. "What kind of trouble?" she whispered. "The kind that gets people taken away," Megan admitted, hating the sound of the words. For the first time since Megan had met Samantha, real panic appeared in the girl's eyes. "They can't take Liam," Samantha whispered fiercely. "I won't let them." Megan's heart ached. "I don't want that to happen either. That's why I came. I need you to trust me." Samantha looked down, her fingers twitching as if weighing her options. "I don't trust adults," she muttered. Megan swallowed hard. "I understand, but you don't have many choices right now." After a long, heavy silence, Samantha exhaled and asked, "What do we do?" It wasn't much, but it was enough. Megan sat beside her, her mind racing. She had been so focused on believing she had a choice that she hadn't considered the next step. Taking Samantha and Liam back to her house wasn't an option. Not yet. With Olivia watching and waiting for a misstep, Megan said, "We need to be careful. You can't stay here much longer. It isn't safe." Samantha glanced toward Liam, still curled up beside the dog with slow, steady breaths. "He's too fragile for long journeys," Megan added before continuing, "so we'll do this in steps. I'll bring food, blankets, whatever you need, but you must promise that if I tell you to leave, you'll listen." Samantha hesitated, then nodded. Though imperfect, it was a start. That night, Megan left with a plan forming in her mind, a promise to help them, whether they trusted her or not, and to protect them no matter what, ensuring that Olivia would never tear their fragile family apart. As the storm finally broke, rain pounded on Megan's windshield as she pulled into her driveway. She sat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, her mind reeling from the day's events. For too long, she had looked the other way, pretending that things were not her problem. But now, she could not, and she would not. The morning air was sharp with the chill of last night's rain. Streets remained damp, and the overcast sky cast everything in a dull gray light. Megan had barely slept, spending the night replaying every possible scenario, trying to figure out how to keep Samantha and Liam safe without drawing unwanted attention. But Olivia was a constant threat, already having threatened to interfere, and Megan knew she wasn't bluffing. That day, Megan arrived at her store earlier than usual. The familiar aroma of coffee and fresh bread did little to calm her nerves as she unlocked the door and flipped the sign to open. She needed a concrete plan, because simply sneaking food to Samantha and Liam would only be a temporary fix. They could not remain in that dilapidated house forever. The morning blurred by in a haze of transactions and half-hearted exchanges with customers. Even before she saw Olivia, Megan could feel her presence, a forceful energy that had become synonymous with people like her. Olivia eventually entered with a smug confidence, her sharp blue eyes scanning the store before landing on Megan. "I warned you," Olivia said, setting her purse down on the counter. Megan's stomach churned. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied evenly. Olivia smirked and tapped a manicured finger against the counter. "Don't play dumb, Megan. I saw you lurking around that old house the other night. I know what you're doing." Folding her arms, Megan asked, "And what exactly do you think I'm doing?" Olivia pursed her lips and tilted her head disdainfully. "Those kids, they cause trouble," she stated coldly. Megan replied, "They're just children." Olivia countered, "They cause trouble, and they don't belong here. First, they steal food. Then they start breaking into houses. Next, they're running with gangs. It's always the same story." Anger surged in Megan's chest. Just yesterday, she might have dismissed such judgments, but after witnessing Samantha selflessly care for Liam, Megan could not stand by. "They're starving," she said firmly, "and a little girl is fighting to keep her baby brother alive while all you care about is how inconvenient this is for you." Olivia scoffed and shook her head. "You think giving them food will change anything? They'll just keep taking, never stop taking," she said. Megan's hand clenched into a fist. "People like that." Olivia shrugged, and Megan's heart pounded as she realized she could no longer remain neutral. "This isn't your business," Megan said in a colder tone than she had ever used. Olivia's eyes flashed with a mocking amusement. "Oh, but it is. I don't want those kids ruining our neighborhood. And if you keep helping them, you'll regret it." With that, Olivia turned on her heel and strode out of the store, leaving Megan standing there with her pulse thundering in her ears. Though Megan wished Olivia were bluffing, she knew all too well that Olivia never made empty threats. Megan had always believed in staying neutral, keeping her head down, and letting the world move on. But now, as the weight of Olivia's words pressed down on her, she realized that she had already chosen a side. There was no turning back. Outside, the air grew thick with the promise of an oncoming storm, the dark clouds swallowing the last remnants of daylight as the sun disappeared behind them. Standing at the entrance of her store with keys clutched tightly in her hand, Megan's thoughts were a jumble of fear and determination. She had never liked Olivia, yet had always avoided conflict. But now, having spoken out, Megan knew she had painted a target on her own back. She locked the door and walked to her car, knowing that Samantha and Liam were still in that fragile house on Maple Street, still vulnerable. Olivia was now aware of their existence, and Megan couldn't trust that she would let it go. With a racing heart, she climbed into her car. The decision had been made the moment she spoke against Olivia. She had spent too long second-guessing herself, and now there was no time to waste. Driving through quiet streets, neon reflections danced on the wet pavement, making familiar roads feel strangely ominous, as if unseen shadows lurked, waiting. When Megan reached the alley near the abandoned house, she killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the silence. The dark windows hinted at life inside, and with quiet determination, she stepped out. Her footsteps were light as she approached the door and knocked softly once. When nothing happened, she tried again, a long pause followed by shuffling sounds inside. The door creaked open just enough for a pair of wary eyes to appear. "Samantha," came a soft word. Megan immediately recognized the exhaustion on the girl's face, the slumped shoulders as if bracing for bad news. "It's me," Megan said gently. "May I come in?" Samantha hesitated, then slowly opened the door wider. The interior was even colder than the night air. Though Megan had been here before, standing in the sparse room, a few old blankets in one corner, an empty can that once held soup, and Liam curled up next to a frail dog with patchy fur. She now felt the full weight of what was at stake. Crouching beside Liam, Megan asked, "Is he okay?" Samantha nodded, though her face remained unreadable. "He's just tired," she murmured softly. Megan exhaled and ran a hand through her hair. "Something happened today," she began. "There's a woman in the neighborhood. Her name is Olivia. She knows about you and your brother. She's the type who stirs up trouble." Samantha's grip on the edge of her oversized jacket tightened. "What kind of trouble?" she whispered. "The kind that gets people taken away," Megan admitted, hating the sound of the words. For the first time since they had met, real panic shone in Samantha's eyes. "They can't take Liam," Samantha whispered fiercely. "I won't let them." Megan's heart ached as she said, "I don't want that to happen either. That's why I came. I need you to trust me." Samantha looked down, her fingers twitching as if weighing her options. "I don't trust adults," she muttered. Megan swallowed hard. "I understand, but you don't have many choices right now." After a long, heavy silence, Samantha exhaled slowly and asked, "What do we do?" Though it wasn't a perfect plan, it was enough. Megan sat beside her, her mind racing as she realized that she had been so focused on believing there was a choice that she hadn't considered the next step. "We need to be careful," she said. "You can't stay here much longer. It isn't safe. Liam isn't strong enough for long journeys, so we'll do this in steps. I'll bring food, blankets, whatever you need, but you must promise that if I tell you to leave, you'll listen." Samantha hesitated before nodding. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. That night, Megan left with a plan forming in her mind, a promise to help them, whether they trusted her or not, and to protect them at any cost, ensuring that Olivia would never tear this fragile family apart. As the storm finally broke, rain pounded Megan's windshield as she pulled into her driveway. She sat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, reflecting on how she had spent so much of her life turning a blind eye to suffering. Now, she could no longer pretend. The morning air was crisp with the lingering chill of last night's rain. The streets were still damp, and the overcast sky cast everything in a dull gray hue. Megan had barely slept, haunted by the weight of every possible scenario, as she pondered how to keep Samantha and Liam safe without drawing unwanted attention. But Olivia's threat loomed large, and Megan knew she had to act. That day, Megan arrived at her store earlier than usual. The familiar aroma of coffee and fresh bread did little to ease her anxiety as she unlocked the door and flipped the open sign. She needed a solid plan, because merely sneaking food to Samantha and Liam would only be a temporary fix. They couldn't remain in that crumbling house forever. The morning passed in a blur of transactions and brief exchanges with customers. Even before Olivia arrived, Megan could feel her presence, a forceful energy that seemed to precede her arrival. Eventually, Olivia strode into the store with smug confidence, her piercing blue eyes scanning the aisles before settling on Megan. "I warned you," Olivia said coolly as she set her purse down on the counter. Megan's stomach churned. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied evenly. Olivia smirked and tapped her manicured finger on the counter. "Don't play dumb, Megan. I saw you lurking around that old house the other night. I know what you're doing." Leaning against the counter, Megan asked, "And what exactly do you think I'm doing?" Olivia pursed her lips and tilted her head disdainfully. "Those kids, they cause trouble," she stated. Megan replied gently, "They're just children." Olivia corrected sharply. "They cause trouble, and they don't belong here. First, they steal food. Then they break into houses. Next, they run with gangs. It's always the same story." Anger surged in Megan's chest. Just yesterday, she might have shrugged off such comments, but after witnessing Samantha's tender care for Liam, Megan could not stand by silently. "They're starving," she said firmly, "and a little girl is fighting to keep her baby brother alive while all you seem to care about is how inconvenient this is for you." Olivia scoffed, shaking her head. "You think giving them food will change anything? They'll just keep taking, never stop." Megan's hand clenched into a fist. "People like that," Olivia shrugged dismissively. Megan's heart pounded as she realized she could no longer remain neutral. "This isn't your business," she declared in a cold tone. Olivia's eyes flashed with mocking amusement. "Oh, but it is. I don't want those kids ruining our neighborhood. And if you keep helping them, you'll regret it. With that, Olivia turned and strode out, her heels clicking on the tile floor. Megan stood frozen, her pulse racing. She knew she had to get to Samantha and Liam before Child Protective Services intervened. Without a second thought, she grabbed her keys and dashed out, flipping the closed sign as she left. Every red light and slow-moving car on the way to Maple Street felt like an unbearable delay. By the time Megan reached the alley near the abandoned house, her heart was hammering. She barely had time to exit her car before she saw two white vans with uniformed workers standing by the door. Her breath caught. They were already there. Megan ran. On the porch, Samantha stood with her small hands curled into fists, her entire body rigid with fear, while Liam clung to her jacket, his eyes wide with panic. The frail dog, Buddy, barked weakly, barely able to stand. Megan pushed through the gathering crowd, her voice sharp and urgent. Wait, wait. A man in a navy jacket, clipboard in hand, turned to her with a polite yet firm expression. Ma'am, please step back. This is a Child Protective Services investigation. Megan ignored him, her eyes locked on Samantha. It's okay. I'm here, she insisted. Samantha's eyes were wild with desperation. Don't let them take us. One of the workers moved forward, reaching for Samantha's arm. The girl jerked away, shouting, Don't touch me. Liam whimpered, clinging tighter to her. Megan's chest ached as she turned back to the man with the clipboard, pleading, Please, they have nowhere else to go. The man gave her a measured look. Are you their legal guardian? He asked. No, Megan admitted. But then you need to step aside. Lowering her voice, Megan said, You don't understand. If you take them now, you'll separate them. You'll throw them into the system, and they'll never see each other again. The man's face remained unreadable as he replied, That's not up to you. Samantha's breathing was ragged. Her hands trembled as she clutched Liam closer. I won't go, she said through gritted teeth. One of the women stepped forward, saying, Sweetheart, we're here to help. Samantha lashed out, shoving the woman away. You're lying, she cried, startling the woman. That's enough, the man said sharply, as two workers moved in quickly. Samantha fought back, kicking and screaming as they grabbed her arms, while Liam sobbed, reaching for her. Something inside Megan snapped. Stop, she shouted, surging forward and grabbing Samantha's wrist before they could pull her away. I'll take them, Megan declared firmly. I'll take both of them. The man hesitated. It's not that simple, he said. I don't care, Megan insisted. I'll foster them, whatever it takes. The workers exchanged glances, and one of the women sighed, asking, Do you even know what you're asking for? Yes, Megan said steadily, I do. A heavy silence followed until the man finally exhaled. You'll have to go through the system, background checks, home inspections, and even then, there's no guarantee, he said. I don't care, Megan repeated. Just don't separate them. Slowly, the man nodded. We'll need to process everything first. For now, the children will have to come with us. Megan's stomach twisted as Samantha trembled, her eyes darting between Megan and the workers. Will you come back? Samantha whispered. Megan knelt in front of her and solemnly promised, I swear I'll get you both back. It wasn't much, but it was all she could offer. Megan watched as they were led into the van, Liam sobbing into his sister's jacket, and then, as the vans drove away, she stood there alone, her hands shaking. She had made a promise, and now she had to keep it. Later that day, the store felt emptier than ever. The hum of the refrigerators and the rhythmic clicking of the ceiling fan were the only sounds keeping Megan company as she sat behind the counter, staring blankly at the register. The day had passed in a blur. Customers came and went, their voices blending into an indistinct murmur. Megan had barely exchanged words with anyone, her mind consumed by the image of Samantha and Liam being taken away. The silence at home the previous night had been unbearable. The absence of their voices weighed on her like a stone. The house felt colder, emptier, and even Buddy's weak barks were missing. Megan had barely slept, pacing her kitchen and checking her phone every few minutes, half expecting a message or a call, but nothing came. When she had promised Samantha she would bring them back, she had meant every word. though she had not foreseen how difficult it would be to keep that promise. By mid-morning, Megan decided she would not sit idly by any longer. Ignoring puzzled looks from regular customers, she locked up the store early and drove to the Child Protective Services office. The building, with its unremarkable gray walls and large glass doors, housed a small reception area with stiff plastic chairs and outdated magazines. The woman at the counter barely looked up when Megan explained, "I need to speak to someone about 2 children who were taken into custody yesterday." Despite the tightness in her throat, Megan kept her voice steady as she filled out the required forms. After handing them in, the receptionist glanced briefly at the papers before disappearing behind a door. Minutes stretched into an hour as Megan sat in a plastic chair, her leg bouncing with impatience every time the door opened. Finally, her name was called. A tall man with neatly combed hair and a weary expression led her into a small office. His nameplate read Mr. Harrison, senior caseworker. Gesturing for her to sit, he adjusted the papers on his desk and asked, "You're here about Samantha and Liam Carter?" "Yes," Megan replied quickly. "I want to take them in." Mr. Harrison sighed and leaned back. "Miss Parker, I understand your concern, but this isn't how it works. The children are now in state custody, and there are procedures in place." "I don't care about procedures," Megan said calmly, "because those kids have no one else. I've been helping them for weeks. They trust me." Mr. Harrison rubbed his face and asked, "Trust isn't enough. Do you have any legal claim to them? Are you a relative or a previously established guardian?" "No," Megan admitted. "Then the answer is no," Mr. Harrison said, "at least for now. The system isn't perfect, Ms. Parker, but we must follow protocol. They will be placed in temporary care while we evaluate their situation. Temporary care means foster homes and separation, and they only have each other," Megan replied, her voice rising with emotion. Mr. Harrison gave her a sympathetic look. "We try to keep siblings together when possible, but there's no guarantee." Megan clenched her jaw and asked, "Then what must I do?" After studying her intently, Mr. Harrison pulled a thick stack of papers from his drawer and slid them across the desk. "You can apply for emergency foster placement," he explained. "It's a lengthy process, background checks, home inspections, psychological evaluations, and even then, it's up to the court whether you qualify." Megan took the papers, her fingers tightening around them. "How long does it take?" she asked. Mr. Harrison admitted, "Sometimes months, sometimes longer." Megan exhaled slowly. "I don't have months. Samantha and Liam don't have months." After a brief pause, he continued, "If you can prove an existing relationship with the children and convince a judge that they're safest with you, the process may be expedited." Hope sparked in Megan's heart as he handed her another form, a petition for temporary custody. "This will go before a judge," Mr. Harrison said. "If you can provide evidence, witnesses, or documentation showing you've been actively involved in their care, it might improve your chances." Megan didn't waste another minute. She filled out the forms in her car over the next several hours, each question feeling like a test, every answer a weight upon her soul. Though she had never thought of herself as a parent, Megan was now applying to become a foster mother to 2 children she had met only weeks before, and she did so without hesitation. Gathering receipts from food purchases, notes from customers who had seen her help, and even security footage from her store showing Samantha sneaking in at night, she submitted the paperwork before the office closed. Then began the agonizing wait. Days that stretched on, each morning filled with phone calls that only confirmed the status as processing, reviewing, or pending. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Megan received the call that her petition had been approved for a hearing. She had one chance to prove to a judge that she could provide a safe home for Samantha and Liam, a prospect that terrified her, but she was determined to keep her promise. The day of the hearing was colder than it should have been for late spring. Megan awoke before dawn, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. She had barely slept, her thoughts consumed by what lay ahead. Standing before a judge for the first time, pleading for the right to care for 2 children to whom she had no legal claim, filled her with nervous energy that made it impossible to remain still. She had rehearsed every possible question, every response, yet knew there were no guarantees. The drive to the courthouse felt surprisingly short as she pulled into the parking lot, the sky streaked with hints of pink and orange. For a moment, she sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel and taking deep, steady breaths. This was it. Inside the sterile courthouse, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and disinfectant. The space was filled with lawyers, silent families, and social workers rifling through thick case files. Megan felt out of place, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She spotted Mr. Harrison near the entrance, speaking quietly with another caseworker. He gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Miss Parker," he said in a neutral tone. "How are they? Have you seen them?" He hesitated before adding, "Samantha has been difficult. She refuses to speak to her foster parents, and Liam has been unusually quiet." Megan's stomach twisted at the news. "They're scared," she murmured more to herself than to him. Mr. Harrison nodded. "That's why this hearing is happening quickly. The judge wants to determine whether they're better off in the system or with you temporarily." The word temporarily hung in the air, a reminder that even if Megan won today, more challenges lay ahead. Before Megan could respond, the courtroom doors opened and a familiar voice called her name. Her heart pounded as she stepped into a modest room lined with bookshelves. The judge's bench was raised slightly, and an older woman with sharp eyes and gray hair sat at the front, reviewing the case file with practiced efficiency. Samantha and Liam were already seated. Megan nearly gasped upon seeing them. Samantha sat stiffly, arms crossed, her eyes dark with anger and lips pressed into a firm line. Liam, sitting beside her, clutched his hands tightly in his lap, his small shoulders slumped as if trying to disappear. When Samantha's eyes met Megan's, a flicker of surprise and confusion passed over her face. Forcing herself to focus, Megan listened as the judge cleared her throat and began, "We are here today to determine the temporary placement of Samantha and Liam Carter." The judge looked up at Megan. "Miss Parker, I see you have petitioned for emergency foster status. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Megan replied steadily, despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. Turning to Mr. Harrison, the judge inquired, "Has Miss Parker been vetted? Does her background check come back clean?" "Yes," Mr. Harrison confirmed. "She has no prior offenses, no history of complaints, and has maintained financial stability for the past 15 years. She owns her home and runs her business independently." Nodding thoughtfully, the judge then asked, "Miss Parker, can you tell me why you wish to assume responsibility for these children?" Megan swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table. "Because they don't belong in the system," she declared passionately. "They belong together, and they need someone who will fight for them." The judge's eyes softened slightly, though her expression remained unreadable. "Samantha," she said, turning to the girl, "do you have anything to say?" Samantha hesitated before softly stating, "I don't want to go back to that house." "And why is that?" the judge pressed. Samantha glanced at Liam and replied, "Because we have to stay together. No one ever really tells the truth. They say they'll help, but they just send us to a place with strangers, and we always have to start over. I'm tired of starting over." Megan's chest ached, and the judge nodded. "Do you want to stay with Miss Parker?" she asked Samantha. After a long, thoughtful pause, Samantha gave a small, nearly imperceptible nod. The judge then looked to Liam. "What about you, young man?" Liam did not speak, but reached for Samantha's hand, gripping it tightly, an answer in itself. The judge exhaled slowly, tapped her pen against the desk, and said, "Very well. Given the circumstances, I am granting temporary guardianship to Miss Parker, effective immediately. A full evaluation will be required in 60 days to determine if permanent placement is appropriate." Megan barely heard the rest as relief flooded through her. She had done it. She had kept her promise. Although Samantha remained guarded, when the bail opened the door, she reached for Liam's hand, and together they stepped into the hallway. Megan finally let out a long-held breath. Samantha studied her carefully and whispered, "You really did it." Megan simply nodded. "I told you I would." After a long, quiet moment, Samantha softly murmured, "Okay, we'll see." Megan knew that trust would take time, but this was the first step, and she wasn't going anywhere. The drive home was quiet. Megan had expected Samantha to be tense, yet she hadn't anticipated the complete silence that settled over the car. Liam sat quietly in the back seat, his small hands gripping the seatbelt tightly, his eyes fixed on the window. Samantha sat beside him, staring straight ahead, her jaw clenched. Megan did not press them to speak, knowing that such moments were overwhelming. Samantha had spent her whole life learning not to trust adults, and one courtroom hearing was unlikely to change that overnight. It would take time, and Megan was prepared for both. When they arrived at her house, the atmosphere felt different, the air heavier, the silence stretching like an invisible barrier. Liam hesitated in the doorway, his small frame rigid with uncertainty. "You can come in," Megan said softly. Liam looked up at Samantha, as if waiting for permission. Samantha gave a small nod, and Liam stepped forward cautiously. Over the next few days, Megan prepared a small space for them. 2 bedrooms, fresh linens, and a stocked kitchen. "I can show you your rooms," she offered gently. Samantha folded her arms and replied, "We don't need separate rooms," but Megan added, "They're there if you change your mind." Though Samantha said nothing, Liam tugged at her sleeve, asking, "Can I see?" With a quiet sigh, Megan led them down the hall and opened a modest, warm room with clean sheets and a few neatly stacked books, a small space just for them. That night, Megan lay awake for hours, the house too quiet in a cautious, almost expectant way. Sometime after midnight, she heard soft footsteps in the hall. She stayed still, listening as Samantha led Liam from his room to the living area. The soft rustle of blankets and shifting of cushions indicated that they were not yet ready to settle in. And that was okay. Megan resolved to wait and help them at their own pace. Over the ensuing weeks, adjustment proved challenging for everyone. Samantha remained distant, her guard perpetually up. She spoke in clipped sentences and ate quickly, as though fearful that the food might vanish if not consumed immediately. Liam, though quieter, was more open. He followed Samantha's lead, but gradually began to soften, his curiosity emerging despite his fear. Megan learned that forcing them would only worsen their unease, so she allowed them to set the pace. Small gestures marked progress. A piece of carrot offered without a word as Megan cooked, or Samantha silently joining her on the porch while she tended the garden. One morning, while Megan made breakfast, Liam timidly climbed onto a stool and asked in a quiet voice, "Can I have one?" It was a simple request, yet it marked the first time he had ever spoken up. Megan slid a plate of pancakes in front of him, and with a thoughtful smile, Liam said, "You make good pancakes." Megan replied, "Thank you," as Samantha appeared in the doorway. Their eyes met briefly, and though no words were exchanged, a small sense of progress was felt. As weeks turned into months, Megan helped them adjust further, shopping for clothes that fit, enrolling Liam in school, and enduring countless meetings with caseworkers, therapists, and court dates. She fought through mountains of paperwork and tirelessly convinced everyone that she was the right person to care for them. It was exhausting, yet every effort was worth it. Nearly a year later, the final hearing for adoption arrived. Megan had barely slept the previous night, her mind racing with possibilities. The courtroom, now smaller and thick with tension, bore witness to Samantha's stiff posture and Liam's quiet fidgeting. Megan sat with her hands folded in her lap, determined to remain calm as the judge examined the case file. "Samantha," Liam, the judge began, "you've been with Miss Parker for nearly a year now. Do you feel safe in her home?" Samantha sat up straighter and replied, "Yes." The judge then asked, "Do you want to stay with her?" Samantha hesitated, and Megan's heart skipped a beat. Finally, Samantha turned to look at Megan and said quietly, "I don't want to start over again." Megan's throat tightened, and the judge smiled slightly. "I'll take that as a yes." The ruling came swiftly after that. The adoption was finalized, the papers were signed, and just like that, they became an official family. That night, when they returned home, Liam ran through the house laughing as he chased Buddy around the living room. Megan watched with a deep, heartfelt relief as Samantha, standing quietly beside her, said, "This doesn't change anything." Megan replied softly, "No, it doesn't, but it's a beginning." Samantha, still uncertain, murmured, "We're still not used to this." To which Megan simply reassured her, "That's okay. We have time." After a long moment, Samantha whispered a quiet, "Thanks," and Megan gently squeezed her shoulder. It was a start, and that was enough. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more great stories like this one. Share this video with your friends and family, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for our next video, and check out others you might have missed. See you next time.